all. Good afternoon, and welcome to Rejuvi 45. And welcome to the topic for today. Topic for today is Beachhead Breakthrough. And as you all kind of recall, we meet the first 3 Thursdays of every month to talk about leadership development topics of interest, and how we're basically seeking to innovate and disrupt the whole leadership development space. This is a space for the community to gather and talk about something fun and interesting. So today we'll be talking about how to create leadership movements inside organizations and how to do it one step at a time. And the topic is Beachhead Breakthrough. And I have Rob Marhula and Scott Goddard here with us. And before we jump in, I'd love to do some quick introductions. So, hey, Rob. Hey, Scott. Welcome to Rejuvi 45.
Hi,
David.
So just before we get started, it'll be wonderful, Rob, if you can just do a quick introduction, give your background, and then Scott, if you can follow Rob, and then I'll do the same, because I think it'll be a good way to get everybody listening in to make a note of the diversity, I guess, that's at this discussion today, in terms of our backgrounds, in terms of our experiences, and even probably in terms of our opinions. So yeah, so go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Vid. As always, it's a pleasure and fun to be on a Rejuvi 45 again. So my world I work in is the world of finance. So my career has been, pretty much entirely on the finance side of business, and different industries, different roles, different parts of finance. And I've been on a few Rejuvi 45s along the way here. So
fantastic. Nice to have you back.
And Vid, I can jump in. Scott Goddard's one of the newer members to the Rejuvi team. As a sales leader on the team specifically, I bring a career in predominantly enterprise platforms and technology systems. The majority of my career has been in sales leadership, sales development, a little bit of sales operations roles and responsibilities too. So I think this is my second Rejuvi 45. Happy to be back. Happy to have you guys ask me to join again.
Wonderful. Yeah, wonderful. Hey, Scott, thanks for joining us. And Rob and I have been on conversations before, but it's also my first time with you. So welcome to the Rejuvi 45 forum. Welcome to Rejuvi, and like I was saying, the diversity of the backgrounds in this call. So Rob, you're finance background. Scott, you've got sales and enterprise sales kind of background. My background is in data and analytics, and I've been inside large organizations, co-founded Rejuvi with Regina Hepp, and really kind of have been experiencing leadership development more as a recipient, if you may. And in my kind of corporate journey or my leadership journey, I'm guessing that's the case for the both of you as well. But it's been a fun journey in terms of our work on Rejuvi, and how we're basically trying to bring like thought leadership disruption, frankly, to the whole segment. So today's topic, like I said before, is called Beachhead Breakthrough. Now, why did we pick that term? And as probably the both of you know, the term beachhead really comes from the world of military tactics, right? So it's a military analogy where creating a beachhead actually has a lot of relevance, if you may, to organizational leadership. So in military terms, beachhead is when you secure a starting point, and you usually establish a foothold on enemy territory, of course, and then you kind of build from there. And similar to that, the notion of a beachhead inside an organization, or as it relates to org leadership or leadership development, involves in establishing a secure foundation for organizational change, right? And so this could mean initiating small projects, implementing new processes or technologies, and change transformation or digital transformation is all the rage these days. So the idea is that, how do you create that change inside an organization via a beachhead approach, securing a starting point and then building from there. So that's really the relevance of what the topic is. And, to bring it to life, some of the, one of the best and my favorite example of a beachhead way of winning the broader war is the D-Day landings, right? The Second World War, June 1944. We all know what the story is. The Allied invasion of the Normandy beach, where basically there were Allied forces. American, British, Canadian, French forces landed on 5 beaches and created a beachhead, if you may, and then from that point on, really penetrated what was called the 2,000 mile, 2,000 mile wall that Nazi Germany had established as a fortress, if you may, and then overcame their resistance. So the successful establishment of these beachheads, if you may, was what got the whole kind of wall crumble. And so if you think about the military analogy, like I was talking about, it also provides organization leaders with strategic frameworks. So I'm going to pause for a second here, and I just love to hear from Rob and Scott, the both of you, um, in terms of the analogy itself, in terms of its application to organizational change or organizational development or leadership, development. What are your thoughts? And first of all, does it relate? Do you resonate to it? Does it make sense?
I'll let you go first, Scott.
Okay. Surely it's again, Vid, I think you've got you hit the nail on the head there. That everybody's got a familiarity with it, not with the beachhead concept and Normandy and D-Day as an example. And it's not uncommon that you look at those types of strategies and the tactics to play out within the strategy. In military analogies in the business world. Certainly from my experience, the sales world very much, takes examples from that. Something else when we were talking about this topic a little bit, I mentioned to you is, Sun Tzu's Art of War, which is, centuries old, strategy documentation is still used in both the business world and even, in a subsection in the sales world very actively. Sometimes they can carry negative connotation, but it is the height of strategy, right? And let's face it, in a competitive marketplace, you need to have a strategy that is a living, breathing campaign, right? And that's exactly what you're talking about here. And one approach to it, or one component of it, being that beachhead.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I agree, Scott, and Vid, and it's a and maybe simplifying it even further for people like me. Even the smallest things in business sometimes need a beachhead, right? So you need to find the right, either whether it's the right executive to help sponsor something, or the right group of people to help motivate other people, whether it's a project or a specific project, or even a business transformation. Or I know, and it's been going on for a while, but in the finance world, there's a lot of discussion about becoming less transactional as finance departments, and how do you do that? And when you've got decades and decades of transactional activities that you're trying to automate, and then you're trying to bring people along with that as well. So how do you really get the right people to help you get the right buy-in and the right resources to actually accomplish that?
Yeah, very true. And in my experience, what I found, and in both observing, but also kind of my own journey, that especially for groups and organizations and companies that are struggling with, say, stagnant growth, or they lack that cohesive leadership, I found that this notion of creating a beachhead basically provides these leaders with a strategic framework for driving change and transformation. Like I said earlier, digital transformation is all the rage these days, and I think that a beachhead really allows organizations to establish a secure foundation, right? They kind of focus on establishing the secure foundation, and then they overcome resistance, right? Resistance to change, or resistance to ways of working, differences, to build momentum and scale up. And the idea is that, that notion of start small and then scale is super, super important. And oftentimes, at least in my conversations, I'd love to hear more from you as well, is when you go into organizations and you talk about change, it usually feels like a big, overwhelming thing, right? Like it's as if we're boiling the ocean and everybody's like, oh my God, we absolutely have no energy nor time to do that. And that's where I think the approach of a beachhead thinking really, really helps, because the idea is not to win the war overnight, right? You got to be thinking about it, in kind of digestible pieces, and then approach it with very strategic and with very strategic intent. So I'd just love to hear, like, do you have in your journeys, in your careers, have you experienced this? Have you experienced a beachhead mindset towards solving a big problem? In other words, like, taking, sizable bites, chewable bites, and then kind of, uh, transforming, if you may, through that.
Well, maybe I'll go first this time. I think I have probably more examples of not having a beachhead, not
Yeah,
seeing an established
yeah.
beachhead before.
Just throw people at the problem,
before
right?
getting into it, right?
Yeah.
I think, I'm trying to think of an example of it being successful in my, in my, in my career. And I'm struggling at the moment, but I think one of the important things is in those instances where it didn't go well, or there wasn't a beachhead, it was I think, like you were alluding to, Vid, where they're doing too much, trying to do too much too fast, trying to either push too much too fast, or again, you go back to, well, if the people you're trying to get to come along with you aren't bought in from the beginning, that's a very difficult journey to try to drag people through. So I think a really important part of establishing that beachhead is understanding, what's impacted, who's impacted, and how to make sure that you're aligning your resources and aligning your thought process and strategy around those.
And we all draw obviously from our personal experience to the question, Vid, and Rob, your input. So mine comes from experience in the sales world, and sales, just like other functional units within an organization, is not immune to leadership change. And many times with leadership change, just in the sales world, might come a change in methodology, strategy, approach. And you'll see when an organization, I've been parts of both, I would say, well planned, and poorly planned transitions or transformations in sales world. And many times, the successful ones identify a group of the sales organization. Sometimes it might be a regional group. Other times it might be like a tier group, right? So I've seen many times where they'll start with like strategic or key accounts. The sales and account representatives who are dealing with the largest, most critical clients and or prospects, and start there. Tends to be because they have, more often than not, the most senior leadership teams. They tend also to have the most seasoned or tenured sales teams. They have clients who are clearly clients and prospects who are clearly dedicated and committed. And then the revenue component tends to be significant. It may not be the largest, sliver of the revenue pie, but it's not insignificant. So those things, I think, are components or aspects of defining a beachhead effectively, right? You don't want to bite off too much, to your point, Rob, in that first effort. And it is a tactic towards, towards succeeding with the ultimate strategy. But it has to be significant enough, and it has to have a leadership core that is trusted, right, within the organization.
What are some of the and kind of, Rob, I really like your thing about saying, you have more examples of when a beachhead approach was not taken versus when it was taken. So I'd love to hear more on that, because it's kind of a provocative statement, right? Because if you think about it, we have org change, or we have change in general. It's not just organization. I think change happening all the time. Somebody said once that the only constant thing is change. And and yet it's kind of a rare thing to experience that beachhead mentality, or that mindset of saying, we're going to start with a secure foothold first, and then with intentionality we're going to kind of keep building from there. What was like when you experienced the lack of it, if you may, what was the biggest result of that, do you think, or kind of what was the impact of that in the broader organization? Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think in one example I'm thinking of, a few of the examples that I can think of that I've been a part of revolve around system implementations, or ERP implementations, or changes and things like that. I think, everything starts out with the best of intentions, and then from what I've seen, where things start to falter is you don't find those early adopters. So leveraging your early adopters, the people who are ready for change and and already see, or can see pretty quickly, the need for the change, or the need for what you're doing, and using them as advocates, right, for the program. And then also, I think, the too much too fast and tripping over yourself can be pretty common as well. Step back, take a more, I don't want to say thoughtful, because that's not the right word to use, but look at your approach, and look at your, how are you really going to manage your resources through that? Because when you go too much too fast, you start to burn out your resources, and then you start to get that internal swirl of angst amongst those in the middle of it, where they're feeling the pressure, they're feeling, they ultimately can burn out on you. And now, and if those are your early adopters, now you've kind of tainted a special pool of people that should be helping move the project forward.
Yep, absolutely. Scott, any kind of your thoughts? I know you talked about the different steps just now, and like how have you experienced the lack of that mindset, do you think?
I think there are times when so kind of continuing forward with a leadership change and a shift in methodology or approach. I think there are times when if the new leadership core does not commit early on to the fact that we have to first define why we're doing this, define how we're going to be going about doing this, and getting the buy-in, of the troops, as an example, that is starting off on the wrong foot, right? Because so that would be, I think, where, in my experience and my examples, that would probably be the most common reason for failure, is not doing the due diligence on the front end. Right. And, if we think about examples, that are household names, or household, stories, things that we've, if you've gone through, grad school, case studies you've, read or seen, or, heard about, that I think I mentioned to you, Nokia, as an example, Nokia in and around the time frame when the iPhone was being launched and announced, they were the hands down market share leader in the, in the cell phone world, right? And we all know where those things stand today, right? I think we can spell Nokia, but we can probably count their market share on a couple of fingers, if it still exists. And there were really two key reasons, as I understand, for this, for the shift that occurred. One was they were very much a command and control type organization. Their leadership team is classically noted as having, led by fear and thou shalt type approaches, right? So they did not have the collective buy-in and support of their team and the sub organizations. But more importantly, they didn't see the forest through the trees. They did not have a plan for evolving their OS. Really, the challenge was the OS not being able to hold a candle to what was coming, in the Apple world. So not having a good plan, not having it well communicated and well bought into, certainly were things that led to the demise of an industry leader at that point in time.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think in both your examples and the narration is exactly why we have a right to speak about this, right? Kind of, we've kind of earned that credibility. I mean, Rejuvi as an organization or as a team, because the common thread to me is the notion around, who was in charge and what was the leadership quality, and capacity and capability at the table to kind of navigate through those challenges. First of all, anticipate those challenges, and then navigate through those challenges, and more importantly, bring everybody along on that journey, right? So it's really the leadership bench when you think about it, which it really comes down to. And we've said this oftentimes, that your leadership bench, or your leaders are the single most important asset inside an organization, right? And tending to that bench is a critical part of the mission, right? It's not just about making the product and selling the product and growing the revenues. It is also tending to kind of, what do you call that? The source code, if you may, of all that activity is your leadership bench. And that's where I think beachheads and beachhead approaches to tending to that bench becomes so important. So, one of the things I would love to kind of talk about today is like, as we think of beachhead, the military analogy, the tactic that then can be applied to organizations, both change, but specifically to leadership, bench, quality, and tending to that bench and making sure that that bench is of the best and most excellent, quality inside an organization. There is, would love to discuss a little bit about, how does an organization do that exactly, right? Like, what are there key components to it? Are there key approaches to it, etc.? Just love to hear your thoughts. Like, what in your opinion do you think should be key components of any kind of a change, transformation, or development, or tending of the leadership bench? And more importantly, how do we then take a beachhead approach to doing that? Do you both have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think first, it is having a change model and a change approach defined, right? Expecting, like you said, Vid, change is the constant, right? So you need to expect the necessity for changing. You need to have defined what are the key indicators that would lead us to need to change, right? Is it revenue? Is it profit margin? Is it attrition rates, right? There are going to be many different levers or indicators but you need to know within your organization and within your industry which are the key which are the key indicators, and be ideally constantly monitoring those, and as you can you know, seeing the trends as early as possible, start preparing the change mentality, right? That it's time for a shift or a push.
Yeah, absolutely. I think oftentimes I've seen that inside organizations, most companies at least, they do have very competent subject matter expertise, right? They do have, good technical support and good technical skills. But where I think some of the issues happen is that not everybody across the organization is recognizing that need for change equitably, right? So they're all kind of, they're happening in like silos. Like there's one part of the organization that's really seeing that change coming at them and they're preparing for it. And then you'll have another part of the organization that's basically not even clued into that. So it's like what I'm hearing from you is that, it's like that broader understanding for the need for change, but also making sure that everybody's seeing it in an equal fashion, right? So that the whole organization can be prepared to kind of step step ahead. Rob, you have any thoughts on?
I want just one thing to add. I think it's also important for the organization to understand what their leadership capabilities are and where they might have some gaps. When as you start to build this out and as you start to think about, where am I going to start my beachhead? Those are the things, another set of things you have to be thinking about is, do I have the skill set to do it? I mean, maybe I do technically, but from the leadership side of things, do I have the right capabilities and competencies to deliver?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and following from there, then, sorry, Scott, were you going to say something?
No, complete agreement. Great point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think then kind of what flows from there for me is that, so once you've really got your leadership bench to really recognize that need for change and that need for change consistently and anticipating what that is, to your point, Rob, identifying the right resources, and if there are gaps, then kind of developing or closing those gaps. From there, then the notion is that what we're saying here is that, okay, so now that you've made that case for change, for lack of another term, now's the time to create that beachhead. So that becomes your second step, right? So it's almost like you recognize the need for change, and then now you start thinking about what that beachhead is. And if we think of org development, or we think of leader excellence development inside organizations, that almost fits the kind of the conversation we're having, right? So first of all, is there a case that needs to be made that the way that we've been developing our leaders fundamentally, and who we develop and how frequently we develop them, is in itself something that needs some change thinking to be put into it, right? We need to infuse some new thought leadership into making the case that there is actually or recognize that need for change. So do you all kind of agree with that? Do you tend to resonate with that observation? Because in my opinion, I think leadership development in itself is I think a ripe area for this whole beachhead approach, if you may, of kind of bringing long-term change, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's, and I know it's been discussed on other Rejuvi 45s, the one size fits all leadership approach that and who we're focusing on, right? The who and the what. But I think, I do agree that me and my world of finance, you and your world of data, Scott's and his world of sales, we all need different leadership development, probably, right? There's some things we need that are just similar that we all should have, but there's also very specific skill sets and specific things we need to be more effective in our areas, right? Developing us all the same way doesn't make Scott a better sales leader or me a better finance leader. I would almost say generically makes us somewhat better leaders, but having the ability to really understand, in your area of expertise or your area of the organization, what are those characteristics and attributes that you need as a leader to be effective, and to move your part of the organization forward are extremely important.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Maybe one point to add or build on there, because again, full agreement with the thought there, Rob, is I think the other thing is in selecting that group, and identifying the group where you're going to establish your beachhead for this, for this change. I think you also, it also needs to be realized that is this a group, is this a group within the organization, or is this a beachhead that everyone is going to pay attention to and recognize? Is that where we want to plant the flag, so to speak, and say, all right, here's where strategy, here's where we start, and here's how this strategy is going to be executed, and why you want to be the next launch onto the beach, right? Because you're now, right, you're behind that flag. So I think it's also incredibly important. That's another aspect of why it's so incredibly important, where and with whom you select to be the beachhead.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And I think that to me, it's almost like saying, somebody came to us, and we've had these conversations, like, organizations that we worked with, people who approach us, they've oftentimes said, oh my God, your ask of an organization, when we say tending to the leadership bench and upgrading your leadership excellence within the organization and doing it consistently, Rob, to your point, across everybody who's accountable for leading the organization, right? Not just picking and choosing or cherry picking, your top 2%, if you may, of the leadership, bench. People have said, well, that's a big ask, right? That's huge. We can't potentially think about it. We can't even imagine. And we would say, yeah, so first, if you recognize that that leadership bench, the way you tend to it, needs to change, then you will basically start saying, okay, how do we invest behind it? And then the investment need not be, like I said, boiling the ocean. It could be by creating this kind of a beachhead approach, right? Like, so you go into into a part of the organization, Scott, to your point about saying, identify that beachhead, make sure everybody's behind it. That's actually the strategic imperative. This is what everybody believes is the place to start. And then you basically start with a pilot leadership development program, right? You you start kind of intervening there in a very small way. And then from there you build, you kind of learn from those select small group of leaders that you worked with, and what kind of difference that's making to their style and approach and impact on the organization. And then you start building from there, right? So once that beachhead is established, then you work to expand or reinforce your position. That's what military leaders do, right? They create the beachhead, and then they kind of work to expand their span of control. And so similarly, you do that within organizations. So it allows leaders to learn from their successes, early successes, get that support, to your point, Scott, and then kind of keep pushing key stakeholders and bringing confidence to the organization, and early adoption and stuff like that. And that's like, to me, half the battle, if you may, to use that term. The other half is, now that you've identified that need, corralled everybody behind that, okay, here's where we're going to establish the beachhead, learn from those, and start building momentum to kind of expand territory of control. I think the other piece is, like, then how do you sustain that, right? It's not just so much, winning the war is easy, somebody said. It's the governing the territories you occupy, which is actually the tougher job, right? So the sustaining part becomes another key part of the whole tending to that leadership bench. So it's not just about establishing the beachhead. The beachhead is to create that initial success and build momentum, but then there's the sustaining that. So what are your thoughts on that? On that part, like how much of that should be part of the internalized thinking as the beachheads are established? Do you know what I mean?
Definitely. So for sustaining that momentum, again, needs to be clear picture, clear plan. But I can think of one point in time in my career I worked for Siemens, and it's certainly a household name organization. And I think when you say, when I say Siemens, most people will think of, you know, medical products or, a physically manufactured product of some type. Well, I happen to work for a software unit that was, serviced engineering and manufacturing engineering processes as an enterprise platform, right? So the CAD systems and the document and data management systems. But the reason that I bring it up is it was kind of a rogue, successful business unit of Siemens, but kind of a not mainstream unit of Siemens. And so for building and then sustaining momentum, that may not be the best place to establish a beachhead of change within Siemens, is this business unit organization, because it's difficult for everybody else to say, well, that's just, they're so different, right? They're a software group. We don't do anything like them, right? We're manufacturing products. So, sustaining momentum is where you can look to these parallel business units or adjacent business units or functional units or groups, right, where you can build that momentum, because it's just a natural swell as you begin to establish the beachhead and the success with that beachhead. Now it's clearly a very logical flow to the other areas or to the other units. Everybody will come along at some point in time, but again, I think a place where, for certain, building and maintaining that momentum is equally as important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think, in some of the examples that come to my mind of where things haven't gone well is just that, right? It's even if you had that established beachhead and you were on the right track, sustaining that momentum and sustaining that message of what are we doing, why are we doing it, and continuing to reinforce the strategy, the what, the why, what's at the end of this, because if you are able to do that, and you're able to do that in a small segment, and then other segments can see what's happening, and then your momentum starts to be like the snowball growing as it rolls down the hill. People start to jump on board because they can see and more quickly understand that, well, it was successful here. Now how do we leverage that, and how do we bring that over to our area?
Mm-hmm. Right, totally. I think that this so it's like building that building momentum and then sustaining that momentum, to your point, like becoming that snowball, if you may, down the hill. While all that is happening, I think, and when that happens, then you do see organizations transform and grow, right? You do see that as a natural result of that. But as you're doing that, it's also important for leaders, organization leaders, to kind of just constantly be agile and responsive, because you're continually assessing the effectiveness of your change initiative, right? And you've got to have the ability to adjust strategy as needed, pivot, course correct, learn from your lessons to inform your future efforts. And that's what military commanders do. So just because they established this beachhead on Normandy Beach didn't mean that was the only tactic they used. As they made inroads, their tactics changed, right? They completely changed, in fact, actually, if you look at the history of that war and what was achieved there. So, so this transformation and growth doesn't come from just, need for change, establishing the beachhead, building that momentum, sustaining the momentum, but you got to keep going, and you got to keep learning and changing, and and consistently doing it over time. So it seems to me that and only then, I think, over time, you'll see organizations actually achieve these profound cultural transformations, right? Leadership development becomes more ingrained in the company's DNA. You have just continuous learning and growth opportunities for all leaders, right? And all leaders pay to lead, the way we would say it. And then the company truly, then the leadership bench then is truly tended to, and is truly thriving, right? So it seems to me that as we think about this topic today of beachhead breakthrough, was really in the in the notion of saying it's a tactic to how you can tend to your leadership bench. And then we kind of really talked about, how an organization would do it, for example. And it seems to me it just plays out in like multiple acts, right? We just kind of talked through it. To be precise, probably it plays out in like 5 acts, right? So the very first one is, do you recognize that there's a need for change? And we would say a huge honking yes, right? And then you say, all right, so if that's the case, where's the place we establish that beachhead? Where do we start? Which is the most critical element of my leadership bench or approach where that needs to happen? Then you learn from that, right? And you build momentum. So you learn from your beachhead, and then you change your tactics and you move inroads. You sustain that movement, and then you transform and grow, right? Would that be a fair summary if I think of everything we've just talked about, I guess? So it's like really plays out in 5 acts, frankly, of how you tend to your leadership bench, and how you basically develop, sustainable growth for organizations, or transformational growth for organizations. Fair?
Yeah.
Very fair.
Agreed.
Yeah, we've talked about a few examples, and I think we all learn from failures or or stumbles, but there's plenty of positive examples as well. And one that I think kind of applies to that summary, Vid, is you think about Amazon, right? And how they've grown and transformed as an organization from inception, conception, if you will. Safe to say the early days. And so it's also kudos to how they've gone about developing their leaders, enabling their leaders, enabling their workforce. And really, I think is one that applies very well to, this continually growing percentage, not just numbers, but growing percentage of people within the organization who are paid to lead something. Right. But with that foundation, they were able to transform and realize the, cloud, the cloud business and cloud initiatives that they have, which I guarantee you was not a dot on the, or a part of the game plan in, year 1 or year 2.
Yep. Absolutely. Excellent. Rob, any last thoughts on the topic before, we kind of, conclude this and bring us home?
No, I think Scott ended us on a nice note there with Amazon.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and to think that they used to sell CDs, right? That's how they first got started, and now they're basically, I think, the largest shareholder on cloud services. So yeah, so there you have it. Yeah, so I think this notion, and in conclusion, we can basically say that a focused approach to leadership development does change and transform, right? Or revitalize an organization, and mainly by creating a beachhead, you can build momentum over time. And then there's just like, the future obviously is filled with what we would call endless possibilities. So once again, Rob and Scott, thank you for joining me in this wonderful conversation at Rejuvi 45. And look forward to seeing you both at a future conversation as well, hopefully. But in the meantime, thank you all for joining us. Do come back next week. So on April 18th, which is next Thursday, we will be talking about control, and it's all about unpacking leadership to business impact pathways. What those components are. How can you actually take leadership development, leadership excellence, and make inroads and improvements there? And then how can you tie that to business outcomes? So let's talk about that. And if you like what you're hearing or listening to, please come back, bring friends, and see you all next Thursday. Thank you all.
Thanks, Vid.
Thank you.